Do you like the No Retreat, No Surrender series, minus the original? Then you might like Death Fighter, also known as White Tiger, directed by Toby Russell, and this one stars martial arts icons of yesterday, Don the Dragon Wilson and Cynthia Rothrock. And the story here focuses on this FBI agent who is in Thailand for some reason, tracking down this kind of criminal with his partner. His partner gets killed, and he decides to go on a revenge mission and kind of enlists a small group of kind of aides, including Don the Dragon Wilson, to kind of take on this kind of like group of bad guys led by this kind of Russian guy called Draco or something like that, who is Cynthia Rothrock is a kind of henchwoman. And that's all kind of like a jungle action film from there. So, what do I think about Death Fighter? This film, unfortunately, looks like it was conceived and made in the 90s. But it's 2017, people. I don't think that shit can fly anymore. It's such a throwback to those kind of films. And I would compare this to the No Retreat, No Surrender series, but the sequels, not the original film. And I actually quite like the sequels back in the day, but that kind of more mindless action just doesn't cut it anymore, unfortunately. The weird thing here is the cast is too old. With the exception of Matt Mullins, who's the kind of the lead character, near enough every other cast member is way too old, I would say, for doing what they're doing. The guy who plays his partner, for example, looks like he's going to have a heart attack any minute. I know he's some martial arts guy or something, so far that's great, but he just doesn't suit this role. And, Cynthia Rothrock, she was always a kind of a fun watch back in the day, but these days it just seems everyone is way too old for doing this kind of action stuff. It just seems like a real low budget version of the Expendables in a lot of ways, but not the kind of production values that it's got. The action here is kind of so generic. The actual dialogue is so cringe-worthy. I mean, again, this just goes back to that kind of like that feeling of yesteryear where you have these kind of like horrible lines of dialogue that sound so cheap and on the nose these days. I will say I did kind of like Don the Dragon Wilson here. He was actually fairly respectable in the role, I would say, and there are a couple of okay sequences, but the action here is shot like ones that seem obviously choreographed, if that makes sense. So you would think if this situation were to happen, people wouldn't fight like that. People wouldn't be having random martial art fights in the middle of a gunfight, and if they do, they probably wouldn't be doing this kind of like these kind of like jazzy moves and all that sort of thing. But it just doesn't work, I don't think. It's just not a well-made film for its time. I think it is definitely a throwback to the days of the kind of the early 90s when you had these cheap action films, not even the kind of the high budget ones, these cheap action films. So if you like those movies, then you may want to watch this one, because it really does take you back to those days. And I quite like a retro film, but this one just didn't hold my interest, unfortunately. It was a real struggle. Don the Dragon Wilson was the best thing on the screen. I'm afraid Matt Mullins made such a kind of cheesy character. He just wasn't believable, and quite unlikable in certain aspects as well. When people will say to him, "You're going to have trouble in the jungle," and he's like, "Pah, no, I'm not," and then obviously does, and things like that. He just seemed like a bit of an asshole, to be quite honest. Overall, didn't like this film. I've got to be honest. Very few things I can say that were of a plus. I struggle to really tell you much to recommend this film. But if you like those kind of like 90s action films, you may want to watch it. And Don the Dragon Wilson wasn't too bad. I'll give this movie a 3 out of 10. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.